Hello, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar brought to you by the National School Boards Association and its Council of School Attorneys. Planning for and managing the school crisis you hope never comes. I'm Sonia Trainer, Director of the NSBA's Council of School Attorneys and your host. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this webinar is a service for our NSBA family of members, State Association staff members, school districts, board members, and school attorneys. It's intended to be an internal information sharing dialogue, not legal advice, nor as a public statement. As of about an hour ago, we had 260 plus sites registered, and we're very pleased that you're all here and listening for this important information. We would ask, though, that any outside members of the media who are joining us today, please note that this dialogue is off the record and internal. Many thanks. Now to begin. 1 week ago, as we all know, we lost 26 people, 20 of them young children, inside the walls of Shandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. We continue to mourn their loss and to offer support to the families and the Newtown community. In the wake of this tragedy, schools across the country are reviewing and perhaps retooling emergency plans. In this webinar, two people who unfortunately have been through school crises before will provide guidance to school board members and, as I said, all of the NSBA community on planning for and managing school emergencies, including shootings. We're so thankful to have both of them with us today. Shamus O'Meara, who is a member of the Council's Board of Directors, and Rick Kaufman. Thanks so much to both of you. Shamus is a partner with the Minneapolis firm of Johnson and Condon. He represents school districts, public entities, and employers in a wide variety of manners. Shamus has over 20 years of experience representing school districts and has been through many crises with public officials, including the Red Lake and Rocori school districts and their school shooting incidents. His public service has included chairing the U.S. Civil Rights Commission State Advisory Council, the Minnesota Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities, and service on a legislative school safety and emergency management task force. Rick Kaufman, who also joins us today, is the Executive Director of Community Relations for the Bloomington, Minnesota Public Schools, where he is responsible for directing the district's communications and community relations programs. He also serves as the district's emergency management coordinator. Rick formerly served as the Executive Director of Communications for the Jefferson County Public Schools, Colorado's largest school system, and the location of the Columbine High School shooting tragedy, which Rick Kaufman oversaw. Rick is a nationally respected consultant, speaker, and trainer on crisis management and communications, media relations, community engagement, and community planning. Again, many, many thanks to both of you for being with us today. As I mentioned, this webinar today is being brought to you by NSBA's Council of School Attorneys. It is part of our mission to provide leadership in legal advocacy for public schools. Our attorneys do a number of services for public schools, and COSA's mission is to provide them services so that they can serve school boards better. Quickly, I want to go through the webinar controls in case you have not been with us before on a webinar. You will see a webinar control panel that has at the upper left corner an orange grab pad. You use that to open and close the control panel. If you have not already chosen audio choices, you need to choose either telephone or mic and speakers, and you will get a number, an access code, and a PIN that is unique to you. Please put those in if you have not already. Also, an important part of today's webinar will be the questioning period, which will be throughout the webinar. In the question box, you can type any question you have for the panelists, I will let them know of your question either as they speak or at the end, but we will try to get to the questions as we go. If you are seeking continuing legal education credit as an attorney, here are some tips. Try to be as active as you can throughout the webinar. Keep it open, ask a question, and ask us afterwards for your certificate of participation. With that, we'd like to begin the presentation. I'm very pleased to introduce Shamus O'Meara and Rick Kaufman.
Thank you, Sonia. Good day, everyone. This is Shamus O'Meara. With me is Rick Kaufman. We appreciate you joining us for this important webinar today. We're here from a shared interest in school safety as well as a shared tragedy of school violence. We're hopeful that we can provide our experience on a comprehensive and important approach to school safety. As school leaders and school council, you have a wonderful opportunity to participate in an important dialogue about safety, to appropriately prepare for an emergency and prevent violence, and know how to effectively respond should a crisis occur. Now, I think it's important to understand at the outset that emergency management for schools is a big issue. We will not be able to cover it in the approximate 1 hour that we have today, but both Rick and I are going to try to give you an overview of some of the more important aspects of emergency management in schools, as well as some practical recommendations that you can take with you. But we do encourage everyone to follow up on these important issues, to please contact us if you have any need for further assistance or any need for access to additional resources. Next slide, please. So as we discuss these issues, we are obviously mindful of the terrible tragedy last Friday at Shandy Hook Elementary School. Both Rick and I send our heartfelt condolences to the Shandy Hook and Newtown communities and to friends and colleagues at the Connecticut Association of Boards of Education, as well as the Connecticut Council of School Attorneys and many others affected by this tragedy. Emergency management includes preparation for an emergency. An emergency is an unplanned event that can cause death or injury, can disrupt operations, can disrupt financial standing, and can come in various forms. Next, please. Many think about emergencies in the context of September 11th. But in a school setting, emergencies occur in all types of forms. Next, please. They even can occur in communities like Minneapolis here, where Rick and I are sitting, in the form of a bridge collapse. 35W bridge collapse that occurred on August 1, 2007. In schools, unfortunately, we have a common history of school violence. We have been through 2 school shootings here in Minnesota, and many other school districts have occurred. Many other school shootings have occurred in school districts around the country. In 2006, shootings at schools in Wisconsin, Colorado, and Pennsylvania led President Bush to hold a national conference on school safety. Some have called these shootings a phenomenon. Next, please. But it's not just school shootings that we're talking about. Take a look at some of these statistics. And these are just the reported ones. 11 million non-criminal but disruptive incidents. Nearly 1 million incidents of theft, fighting, serious crime. This points up a broader issue of school climate, of respect, of building positive relationships in schools between students and between staff and students. And it's not just crime. physical injury, chemical spills, medical conditions, property damage, you name it, it has or likely will occur in schools because our schools reflect our communities. Without a comprehensive plan, without a pre-planned and focused, cogent approach, schools will simply not be ready when these emergencies occur. And it's the law. Crisis and emergency management policies and procedures are statutorily required in many states, really nearly all of them. In Minnesota and other jurisdictions, schools are required to develop their plans cooperatively with community partners and use best practices, recognizing the various hazards that schools face. We're talking about an all-hazards approach to managing emergencies and risks within schools. These hazards can range from low-impact incidents such as minor accidents or fighting without injury to high-impact incidents such as assault with injury, fires, intruders, chemical weapons, chemical accidents, weapons, or pandemic flu, for instance. Federal statutes impact emergency planning. The federal OSHA statute is comprehensive in this regard. It requires site-specific plans. It requires clear evacuation planning, and it applies to employers. Next, please. It requires policies of violence prevention. And overall, this particular statute is one that school lawyers and school leaders should take a look at because it imbues several important principles that we believe in the realm of emergency management. Another important standard and guideline for especially the school lawyers to consider is the National Fire Protection Association Emergency Preparedness Standard 1600. This is one of the more important national standards that are out there, and one that has been vetted by the 9/11 Commission. This came out in 2007 and has been amended with a new edition in 2010, and another one is in print for 2013.
Shamus, it's Sonia. Sorry to interrupt you. We do have a question about the previous slide, which included requirements like 5 lockdown drills per year, and the question is that a federal requirement?
No, it is not. That's Minnesota's statutory requirement. That's an example of one of many states where lockdown drills, fire drills, cooperation with community partners, and standardized planning is codified by, in this case, Minnesota's local laws.
Thanks.
So we can move to the next slide. We highlight a finding of the 9/11 Commission because we think it's real important, and I think the lawyers will understand this as they read it. We believe compliance with the standard, this is standard 1600, should define the standard of care owed by a company to its employees and the public for legal purposes. So we're talking about a standard of care that could very well be utilized in a litigated matter or in an investigation to determine whether and to what extent a school district acted reasonably. The NFPA 1600 standard may well become an objective measure by which schools and their emergency management plans are viewed. It's important to convey to the attendees that our federal government, from Homeland Security to the U.S. Department of Education, Health and Human Services, Department of Labor, and even the White House, have spoken very clearly about the importance of emergency management procedures. It wasn't too many years ago that we used to have things like this in drawers. You would look to pull it out if there was an emergency. We're here to tell you that trying to find and read your decision-making tree during a crisis is difficult at best, and it's not the way that we do things. In schools, like in many other public institutions, we utilize a coordinated, integrated, phased approach to emergency management. Each of these 4 phases, prevention and mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery, has its own characteristics, but they rely on each other and are integrated and often overlap. This is the new way. It's a tried and true method that has been used throughout the country. It was originally used by fire departments in the 1970s, and after 9/11, police agencies began to incorporate these principles, and they're used nationwide in all police agencies. And Rick, at least my perspective is that they are used widely throughout schools to this day.
More and more school districts are using the 4 phases of emergency management because, as Shamus said, it is a coordinated, integrated effort to help schools do an approach to emergency management that has a sequential nature to it. It's planned and carried out in a very easy way, at least on paper. Does not necessarily mean that's how school districts do, but having this kind of a plan is far easier to manage than all of the old approach that we used to have.
It's important to understand that when we talk about school safety, we are emphasizing community safety. Why do we do that? Well, 20% of our nation's population is in a school or on campus right now today. Schools are community assets, and this means that community partners, including the ones that we identify here as well as others, must be engaged and have very important and vital roles to play when it comes to safety in our schools.
Shamus, I'm interrupting you just for a moment to note that I've put a poll question up there, which should be appearing in the attendees control panel. And that question is, has your district reviewed its emergency management plan within the next year? So I'd like to see what those responses indicate.
Thank you.
It looks like we have a very high percentage, close to 90%, who have reviewed them in the past year, with 13% saying no. And next we'll ask the question about one moment, see if I can get it. Okay. Sorry, everyone. Sorry, one moment. There we go. Okay, so about 90% have reviewed them in the last year. Please,
That's good.
Please continue.
Okay, so if we can go to the key elements slide, please, Sonia.
Oh, sorry, one moment. Oh,
Okay, great, thank you. It's an all hazards approach that we're talking about. And we're talking about engaging community partners, utilizing best practices and vetted resources that we practice and that we take ownership over, that we update. And I like this poll that we just took here because 86% of you have updated it, or at least looked at it this year. And we're using a standardized command model that we'll talk about in a moment called the National Incident Management System. I want to talk a moment about prevention and mitigation. These are things that you do at the outset to understand issues of safety, issues of vulnerability for your school campus, and to engage resources to begin the process of emergency planning. It's taking steps now to prevent or reduce incidents and exposure to damage. Safety auditing is important. You can't know what is important in terms of critical issues of safety and risk exposure until you survey and audit and understand what you have and what you don't have. A safety team is important to set up to assess your current status of your planning. And obviously we just talked about this in our poll review and revise established emergency management plans that are required in many, many states. There is a design concept that I think is important for school leaders to understand and that you can interact today with your retained architects, and it's called CPTED, Crime Prevention Through Environmental Design. And this is using design elements in your school buildings to provide safer environments, whether it's lighting or ingress and egress, card key access, the way people move about buildings, including the exterior buildings. These are important concepts that many design professionals that are working with schools should know about. And so here's an issue that we certainly would like to suggest that schools take a look at.
Shamus, we have a question on that topic, which is what are the recommendations, if there are any, for adding bulletproof entryways? I know that issue has gotten a lot of press.
Well, there certainly is room for discussion about bulletproof glass. Later on in the presentation, we'll talk about active shooter scenarios if we have time. But I think it's important to be mindful that school safety is overall safety, and we had our pyramid earlier where we showed the hundreds of thousands of non-serious incidents, and it's kind of the continuum of hazards and risks that schools face. Now, each school needs to look at this comprehensively and understand, are you planning only to protect your school against intruders, or are you planning comprehensively for safety? We think you should plan comprehensively for safety, utilizing the 4 phases of emergency management, and in doing so, you'll be able to take a look at CPTED concepts, bulletproof glass, whether it makes sense to spend limited resources on 1,000 cameras in an attempt to deter crime, or on a program that puts teachers in hallways and builds trust relationships with students, uses perhaps a Super Friends anti-bullying program that empowers older students to be role models for younger students, so that we have great communication and a positive atmosphere in which students and staff work during the school day.
I think that's really valuable as a general concept, Shamus. We are getting a few questions about specifics, and I have to think that this is a result of what school officials are hearing and being asked themselves in the community. So bear with me while I give you one more, and that is, how do we protect students who have to go outside to get to their classrooms? For instance, in my own son's elementary school, there are 13 portable classrooms attached to the building, and there's a lot of walking back and forth in covered walkways, but that are open to the air. Do you have any specific thoughts on that, or do you know if the CPTED recommendations discuss that?
Rick's going to wade in on this one.
Okay.
Sonia, school designs, many of our schools are 20 and sometimes 30 years old or more, and many of the designs were not done at a time when to deal with some of the school violence and incidents that we've had in the last 13, 14, 15 years. As such, those schools have looked at their current designs and put in place certain elements to the building to, in some cases, serve as a deterrent, in other cases to eliminate or decrease the risk of such intrusions. We, unfortunately, schools, and sadly, cannot give 100% assurance that students will be safe. So what Shamus talks about and what we counsel school districts across the country is developing not only those types of plans, but those safety-first concepts in conversations with what's best driven by the community, law enforcement, and other partners in terms of response. To answer your question specifically, there are school districts that have those open concepts, and we see a lot of that in the Southwest and California area, that they need to look at how students are moving from building to building, and what are those safety precautions that are put in place, and whether or not the school and community wishes to change the design of the school, and if not, how best then to protect kids in those kinds of situations. Almost all of our elementary schools still have playgrounds, and students still go outside for recess, because that is a key component of the educational day. We have adults and staff that are outside with our students, but does it put them in somewhat of a vulnerable position? It does, but not unlike the daily, particularly and on weekends, that people are out and about. So not to say that we don't believe that those kinds of questions need to be addressed. It's being practical with what does the community want, how can the school and school district best respond to those community needs, and in the absence of really creating armed fortresses, what can we put in place to try and keep kids as safe as possible?
Yep.
And I actually agree with those comments from Rick. Another aspect to answering that question is how is traffic being utilized to the portables? Are we having single students walk between classes? Can we look at the traffic patterns and scheduling? If there is an identified vulnerability there in the context of our school safety planning, so that a schedule or putting an adult out there monitoring the traffic between the main building and the portable is there. Those types of things are important to look at, but something like access to the portable has to be vetted as part of an overall approach to safety. And if it's identified as an important aspect of addressing safety, sure, I think there should be some staffing, some trafficking issues. Any number of questions come up about safety. One of the biggest issues that we're getting calls on this week is open lunches. Students driving away from campus and outside of the protections of their school campus, and whether or not a policy decision should be rendered to close the open lunch period. There's just a number of issues that are involved in that, from safety within the school to kids driving cars to use of drugs and alcohol off campus to jurisdictional issues off campus. And all of those things are important to address, but they need to be addressed as a part of an overall safety approach, and they need to be addressed with community partners, with police agencies, with mental health officials, with law enforcement, so that everyone takes ownership of this issue, and we have a well-vetted approach to safety.
Thanks, gentlemen. I'm changing the slide.
Some other ideas that I think are fairly easy for districts to look at on the front end is engaging your insurance company for safety ideas. We have loss control and accident prevention people who are out within the district. Have a conversation with them. Look at available risk mitigation programs and resources that they might have available for you. Some of these insurers, some of these administrators have safety survey and auditing capabilities. We talked about engaging fire and police departments for ideas involving safety prevention. We touched upon, and it's important to highlight the fact that school climate is a huge issue. Anti-bullying is a big issue across our nation's schools. And those programs, as well as students' assistance and well-being programs and the use of mental health professionals is an absolutely vital part of the prevention and mitigation aspect of emergency management. Innovative approaches, we have advised districts and other municipal and public entities for many years on joint powers arrangements, cooperatives, MOUs, and this can be done in the area of emergency management. Some of this stuff can get a bit pricey, especially if you're changing physical structures of buildings to accommodate safety. But cities have to do this, counties have to do it as well, states have to do it. There is a way to partner together on these issues through joint powers cooperatives or other memorandum of understanding to accomplish your safety goals. We've talked a little bit about this, but on the preparedness side, we're actually developing the plan. We're engaging our resources, our community. Our goal is community ownership with our partners, with law enforcement, with fire, with mental health, with parents. Parents are huge. Students. Students should be part of your school safety team, and you should be listening to them and understanding them. If you want to build trust relationships with students, involve them in a leadership capacity within your school so that they can take ownership over what's happening. Preparedness includes the National Incident Management System. There's a lot to be said about this, and in this short time period, we're just going to give you an overview, but it's very, very important. It is a coordinated national command system that originated from the California wildfires in the early 1970s. As I mentioned previously, fire departments have used it since that time, and really 9/11 was the watershed for police agencies and other law enforcement agencies to take this on nationally. And schools are using this now. We're using an incident command system, best practices, and we are training and exercising under a standardized framework with interoperable features so that police and fire and schools and other people that are responding to a crisis or emergency situation can speak to each other. If you remember the public information that came out of the 9/11, the World Trade Center in particular, fire and police couldn't talk to each other because of some of the different systems that they were using. This National Incident Management System approach allows schools to be plugged into this standardized framework so that if a crisis situation is occurring, we all know what we're doing. It has 6 components. I'll emphasize being prepared. Many of these agencies use mutual aid arrangements so that we don't get into jurisdictional disputes as we're coming on scene. And when we go to the next slide, you'll be able to see this applied in a school setting. This is an incident command system in a school. Now let me just talk about this practically. In a school situation, if there's a crisis in a classroom, the teacher in that classroom is the incident commander. And she is the incident commander until the principal or somebody else comes in and replaces her. And then the principal is the incident commander until, well, if law enforcement is called, if it's that type of crisis, the responding officer will become the incident commander. And you can see in this matrix here who's plugged into this program. And it's a really important concept for schools to get used to, and it's really easy to implement because it supports the factual situation that's occurring and allows decisions right there in the classroom all the way up the line as other agencies are responding. The bridge collapse that we showed you earlier, this is the incident command structure. The fire department was on scene. They had a unified command. There was an emergency operations center. But you can see all the different agencies that were involved, and it's just important to understand that whether it's a bridge collapse or a school shooting or a chemical spill or a tornado or a hurricane, these structures work. And when we talk about standardized and practiced plans, it's important for schools to get on board with this, and many, many schools do this. So we're going to turn to the response phase for a little bit. I'm going to turn it over to Rick on some of these slides, and I'll wade in with some additional comments.
So when we talk about response, many of the responses Shamus has shared with you is not only school-based practice, best practices, but also what we've learned over the years with national incidents, national tragedies, like the tornadoes in Joplin, Hurricane Katrina and Rita, the national response. What we know to be a best practice is to mobilize your response teams that not only shield the site and students and staff from outside forces. It's critical to allow staff to do their job and respond to students that may need the triage or care, and not have to weigh in against those outside forces that demand their time and attention. Make call for assistance before it's too late. In many of these large-scale tragedies that have impacted our schools, school staff are, in some cases, while they're trained, may not have the experience or expertise to handle all that comes with it, and particularly with the Columbine shooting tragedy and most recently in Newtown, the magnitude of the crisis generates a tremendous response from not only national but international media, state resources for information, and all kinds of outside groups. And so it is important to know that there are resources in the country to assist, such as the National School Board Association, National Association of School Psychologists, and even the National School Public Relations Association that has developed rapid response teams to assist either boots on the ground or via technology utilizing what we have today. It's not business as usual, and it's important that we not only act in the short term, but think long term. Many of our school incidents can be resolved within 24 to 48 hours. Others have a far longer shelf life. Know the key messages and stick to them, and these are important with respect to school districts that have developed information, corroborated information that is being shared not only with parents in the community, because it helps to reduce the amount of rumors and information flow that is going out there that's coming out of the school district. It is important to note that we don't allow the media to dominate the time and attention. We respect and acknowledge what the media's role is in responding and reporting on such national events and school incidents. But we also, our primary function in schools, when we're dealing with any type of emergency or critical incident, is the safety, care, well-being of our students and staff, and reassuring that they are safe, and also in many cases then reunifying them with parents and trying to find the business of getting back to a new sense of normalcy. Next slide.
So we have a few slides that we title response considerations, and both Rick and I have some thoughts about these. But because we're coming here just a week after the Shandy Hook tragedy, we thought we'd try to provide some real kind of nuts and bolts recommendations. Some of this relates to school leaders, some of it relates to school lawyers. I think all of it, in one way or another, touches upon your disciplines. But at some point, if this crisis is large enough and it is important enough in terms of the issues that are involved, you'll need to convene an emergency or special board meeting. You'll have to identify who from the school leadership needs to be there. You'll hopefully have your response plan in place, and you're going to carry that response plan out, and your team should be in place. But if you don't have a crisis team assembled, Here are some areas that we think are important for you to have present. The superintendent in some jurisdictions is an ex officio member, but we have consultants, school board members or designated members, critical administrators, State Department of Education representatives. If it's a large enough crisis, perhaps a national school representative. But you have to have a predetermined and designated leader or chair, and you have to have a meeting schedule set. There's a number of different resources to help get that crisis team set up, but for those that need assistance in responding to a crisis, these are some practical ideas. Immediate action items. Rick was part of a large response in the Columbine situation with any number of these. As a lawyer that represents schools and speaks to this issue nationally, I can tell you that there are potential liability issues that need to be dealt with and practical issues of evidence preservation. There is a huge need to cooperate with authorities, to understand who you're speaking with, to understand what their role is. Hopefully, before this crisis happens, you as school leaders will have met with your local authorities and understand their role as part of an emergency response. There are any number of items that can take place in a large enough emergency involving media and press and photographs and sensitive information. The disclosure of those items is important, and an inventory of those items is really important to have. As a school lawyer, having handled 2 school shooting incidents, it was vital to our office to request and to have an inventory of these items so that we could cogently speak to them, not necessarily in a formalized claim situation, but as a practical area where we could advise our client, and to talk to the U.S. Attorney's Office, for instance, that handled the criminal investigation in one of those incidents. So these are just things to keep in mind. As Rick mentioned, there's a number of state and national resources. The National School Boards Association is hosting this, and they have some great information. We'll have some resources at the end. Whether you reopen school or use leased or loaned space, if it's a hurricane, tornado, a school shooting, those issues will be front and center. It has to be coordinated. Security has to be put in place, and you need your partners involved in that as well. Speak on grief counseling.
One of the key pieces in schools that dealing with a crisis is the grief counseling piece that it falls under. We'll talk a little bit if we get to the time of the recovery after a tragedy, but in terms of grief counseling, making it available not only for students but staff in different forums. Students, we have found, will age appropriate need to discuss the tragedy, even if it's not the specific school district. Schools across the country this week have been were prepared on Monday after last Friday's tragedy to talk with students and allow them opportunity to process their thoughts around the tragedy and how it impacts their life. Having those mental health resources and grief responses in place, critical to any response plan.
We're going to go a little bit more quickly through the response considerations, and go to the next slide, please. For the lawyers in the audience, if you're dealing with a crisis situation, you may need to recommend some expertise in crisis management, both for practical issues in terms of addressing things that occurred with respect to your emergency management planning, as also potential liability exposure. I think notice to the district's insurance company and getting them to come in and partner with you on some of these issues is critical and important. There are records that need to be obtained, memorandum of understanding regarding school resource officers and their role. Safety information will be asked for and is vital for you to know for all sorts of different reasons, including how did you address the situation that you're dealing with. How do you assess that? How do you improve? As well as putting it in the hands of lawyers potentially to deal with claims or risk management from the incident. Next, please. Depending on the law of the particular jurisdiction where the incident occurs, there may be a need to send a letter to district personnel to preserve records. And in the electronic information age, we're talking about emails, text messages, voicemails, photographs, stuff that's stored on phones. All of that stuff is important, and it's evidence, and it may need to be preserved. You may have to do it as part of a forensic or criminal investigation into an incident. So from a school lawyer's perspective, issuing these letters to district personnel would be an important consideration early on in the aftermath of a crisis. Communication is a big thing. Obviously, Rick is going to speak about that a little bit more specifically. But getting the district's perspective about communication out to its employees is really important. Depending on the jurisdiction and depending on the particular title of the district employee speaking, their statement could be imputed to the district for liability purposes. And there's all sorts of practical reasons to make sure communication is coordinated, and the district is being provided with notice in advance of any communications that's going forward. And these are just practical considerations that are part of this. Next, please. Here's more practical advice on collecting and securing information. You know, as counsel, it doesn't have to be just a school shooting incident. It can be other incidents of crisis. You're going to need to obtain all sorts of information that's out there, maps of the school. There's model policies that might come into play either through your state association or through national guidelines like the Standard 1600 that we mentioned. Next, please. There's an entire training we could do on grant assistance and accessing federal resources. One of the individuals that provided materials to this conference is Bill Modulewski at the U.S. Department of Education. He's a great resource. Grant assistance is available depending on the crisis, and we encourage you to know your federal partners so that if something along the lines of a crisis occurs, federal money may well be available.
So let's talk briefly about communications, which is the foundation for any planning, implementation, management, and recovery of a school incident, emergency, or crisis. We talk about communication, we really break it down into three areas: internal, external, and media. And while some would consider media as an external source, it is enough large a group that I'll pull it out here for special attention. Internal certainly is our leadership, staff, key stakeholders, and students. Large school districts need to consider that your schools outside of the epicenter, if you will need the same type of information. They'll be dealing with the types of fallout that, as I noted earlier, many school districts across the country had. Internal communication is important to keep your staff aware of and to tamp down rumors or misinformation that may be out in the community, but also to have that is out of respect and a professional protocol within school districts to communicate to internal staff first. External, by and large, our parents or community are our first and most important informational resource. Parents need to know what's going on, and keeping them in the loop on the front end as well as during the crisis and the aftermath is critical to the recovery of not only the organization but also the students that will be coming back to your schools after an incident. Parents are your greatest supporters in most cases too, and when they have information readily available to them and in a timely fashion, there is a greater response, and the support for an organization actually grows. Taking care of the internal and the external these are key aspects of the communication. When it comes to media, as I noted earlier, to respect the media's role and responsibility, is it really about how do you, as a community, how do you as a school district heal and return to a sense of normalcy? Other than being with families, we know that students are with their peers and other adults in a school setting a large portion of their growing up years, and in any given year and any given week. So helping them back to school, to a school setting, to the opportunity to connect with their friends and the others in their class, and also the adults, is part of their mental health recovery. Staying on message and speak with one clear voice, it's critical that the organization, with those types of key messages and information, is communicated across so everyone is saying the same thing. It allows the school district to recover in a quicker fashion and to not deal with the types of misinformation that may be perpetrated by others in the community and or the media. It is important to respond to all reasonable requests, but to do so in a way that does not dominate or take away from your role and responsibility to your students, staff, and the organization as a whole, and to develop guidelines for media access to students and staff. We don't ever tell students and staff they can't talk to the media, but we do expect for them to engage communication protocols in doing so. Next slide, please. In a crisis, the speed of communication is critical, and when I speak to the speed, it is to try and get information out, corroborated information that is not based on speculation, but what we know to be fact, and what we know to not damage the organization in terms of providing misinformation. First impressions are lasting impressions, and when school districts can get in front of a crisis, or best to stay even with it, the organization recovery is shorter and far more positive. Factual content of the message, get it right, repeat it, and share with others. Again, while it is something media will speculate on the incident at hand, and what we've learned sadly with these types of seminal events that have occurred in our schools, a lot of misinformation comes out in the early hours of a crisis, and media then has to do a lot of backpedaling, and so it's far better for the school district to share information that we know to be true and factual. And I will say at this point, it's also, as Shamus and I have shared numerous times here or reiterated, working in cooperation with your agencies, your first responder, your law enforcement, your legal counsel with this type of information is also very helpful. Trust and credibility. It is important to sustain the support during and after a crisis, and in doing so, it's providing information that we know to be true, and the elements that you see on your screen go a long way towards the healthy recovery of an organization.
Rick, I just wanted to interrupt for a moment because we did have a comment from someone in our audience who was present at the Newtown incident last week, and she mentioned that the press were able to get very close right away, and unfortunately also provided reports that weren't accurate. So what you're saying is holding true in Newton as well.
Yeah, let me share something with whenever you have those kinds of incidents. It's, we talked about coordinated planning. It's best for schools in a school district to have not only an emergency alternate location where students would go in the event of an evacuation, or as they are leaving that building to go to a place to reunify with parents. We know we can't tell parents not to show up at school in a crisis. They will. It's better if we have a place for those parents to go to as a group that is shielded from media and protected from others to be reunited with their children at some point. It's also important to have what I call a bullpen, a location that media is best suited to get information, official information, either from law enforcement or the school district. A bullpen that is close enough to the school, because you cannot keep media completely away from a school, and wanting to have that visual piece for those that are providing it, but also a place where then you can share information. And as I said, there's the law enforcement can assist you because in many of these cases, if it's a crime scene, in keeping media away. And again, as we've shared, we don't tell our students and staff not to talk to media, but we do share with them they have an equal right not only to say yes to an interview request, but also to say no.
Thanks.
So the next slide is important to note that the technology today and the speed with which communication travels, in many cases, media and others will have information before the school district can get accurate information and be able to disseminate it. Students with their cell phones can text, tweet, and send all kinds of messages in a far more rapid, far quicker pace than school districts can respond. To match that, school districts should use those various different channels to get information out. School districts that have not yet embraced social media outlets such as Facebook and Twitter, Pinterest in some cases, it's important to consider those and develop social media guidelines for use in getting information out. We know that the use of social media is growing at a very rapid pace and less reliance on emails and other text types of messages. Having rapid notification systems is critical to keeping parents in the loop of information coming from the school. Far better technology that allows us to communicate in a quicker fashion, and utilizing rapid response notification systems can go to multiple telephone, cell phone, work phones, and email accounts as well. Communication is important to stay focused on our target audiences. As we said, parents and our staff are our primary sharing of information is critical. It's important to view the crisis from the outside in to gauge the public response and to watch for those political and personal agendas. Our primary role is for the safety and well-being of students and staff. And after a crisis, it's how do we heal and return to normalcy. And as such, while respecting the media's need for information and also our community, it is also our responsibility to help protect our students and staff from those kinds of things and to be aware of the ripple effect and copycats that I think many school districts across the country are dealing with. The end of the school day today can't come soon enough for many of us. Maintain active rumor control through the use of many of those communication channels. As we move into the recovery piece, one of the things in the last 13 years, my experience in working with thousands of school districts across the country, is the need to do a better job of recovery. We have improved our systems of training and emergency management, having plans, as your survey earlier noted, training those plans, practicing those plans, and the response itself. The recovery is an area that I think we need to do a better job. Crisis can be long-term, and such recovery is a healing process that will take some time. We don't all recover in the same on the same time period, and may need resources and assistance throughout, not only in the days and weeks in the aftermath, but sometimes months and even years. Utilizing coordinated grief counseling and mental health resources in your community and in your state, and in some cases nationally, involve those community partners. They are a resource to help your school in the recovery process. You look for those opportunities to return to a normalcy and allow schools the opportunity to what works best for them. We can't tell you when it is best for students to return to a school that has gone through such tragedy, or when it's possible given the damage that may have occurred inside, or emotionally whether students and staff can return to school. That's a conversation that certainly we had very difficult conversations, and the Newtown community will be wrestling with in the days and weeks to come. As we noted earlier, bring in reinforcements. There are professionals across this country that are willing to lend a hand either on site or from afar. And one of the things I think we've learned is take care of yourself and your team. You cannot be effective if not taking care of yourself as you muscle through through the tragedy. Other key recovery pieces: continuously update your emergency management plan. Debrief after every type of incident. It's important because you learn a tremendous amount. Mistakes will be made, and it's okay to learn from those mistakes. Learn from those situations and train new staff immediately retrain all staff annually, and don't forget students in your emergency planning and training. I've often believed that crisis not only creates character, but it reveals it. You'll know who are your leaders who will step up, and tragically, in some cases, as we've seen, leaders that put themselves before their students. Remember your team on anniversary dates, and more importantly, remember if you've been through a crisis, when these types of incidents that we experienced last Friday, what it does is in many cases, those that have survived are victims of past school events and tragedies, re-traumatizing in many cases those survivors.
Okay, this is Shamus again. You know, we're mindful of our time here, and as I mentioned at the outset, we can't cover everything, but we do want to give you just a little bit of sense of the federal perspective on safe school initiatives and school shooting. In 1999, the FBI issued their threat assessment perspective, and they called for a fair and rational and standardized method of evaluating and responding to threats. And so it's important to know this has been around for a while. And if we go to the next slide, in 2002, the U.S. Secret Service and the U.S. Department of Education issued two very important reports. The first was the final report of the Safe School Initiative, and they looked at 41 school shooters involved in 37 school attacks between 1974 and 2000. And they have 10 key findings. I'll get to that in a second. The second report that they issued was entitled Threat Assessment in Schools, a Guide to Managing Threatening Situations and Creating Safe School Climates. This is a great resource. It's a great practical resource on ways that schools can assess threats, to set up and use a threat assessment team, who should be part of it, and protocols to engage in it. I actually have in my hands here a CD that was issued by the Department of Education entitled Scenarios Exploring the Findings of the Safe School Initiative and a Safe School and Threat Assessment Experience. And I've been through this, and it takes schools through scenarios and examples of threatening situations and teaches how to set up a threat assessment team and then go through the process of determining whether the student or the subject poses a threat to the school or to the school environment and how to deal with that. So back to the Safe Schools Initiative. This is in relation to 37 school shooting incidents, and these are important findings. The first is incidents of targeted violence at school are rarely sudden, impulsive acts. Prior to most incidents, other people knew about the attacker's idea and had or plan of attack. Most attackers did not threaten their targets directly prior to advancing the attack. Next slide, please. I think that might be a duplicate slide. Let's go to the next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Okay, going on with these findings, there is no accurate or useful profile of students who engage in targeted school violence. That's critical for schools to know. You know, you can't identify a school shooter because they're wearing black or wearing a long coat or haven't shaved in a week. And these are people that know profiling. This is the U.S. Secret Service folks and the Department of Education, and they went through these studies, and this is a comprehensive finding. Most attackers engaged in some behavior prior to the incident that caused concern or indicated a need for help. Most attackers were known to have difficulty coping with significant losses or personal failures. Many had considered or attempted suicide. Many attackers felt bullied, persecuted, or injured by others prior to the attack. Most attackers had access to and had used weapons prior to the attack. In many cases, other students were involved in some capacity. And finally, despite prompt law enforcement response, most shooting incidents were stopped by means other than law enforcement intervention. So those are the 10 findings of the Safe Schools Initiative. And then in 2008, following that study, the U.S. Department of Education and Secret Service did a follow-up study, and they called it the Bystander Study. They looked at the Safe Schools Initiative, and they found that 93% of the perpetrators involved in those 37 school shooting incidents exhibited concerning behavior prior to the attack, suggesting that the attacks might have been avoided with the proper observation techniques and more open sharing of information. You can see the next large percentage here. In 81% of the shooting incidents, at least one other person had some type of knowledge of the attacker's plan, and in 59% of the incidents, more than one person had such knowledge. 93% of those individuals who had prior knowledge were peers, friends, schoolmates, or siblings. So what does this mean? It's about school climate. Schools should ensure a climate in which students feel comfortable in sharing information about potential threatening situations. Their decisions to share knowledge of planned school violence results directly from that student's positive emotional connection to the school and its staff. Bystanders that don't share information relate to a more negative impression of the school. And so we quoted in this next slide the bystander study and what climate and how important climate is. And so when we talked earlier about prevention techniques, we meant what we said about school climate and positive behavioral aspects and promoting trust relationships between students and staff. Next slide, please. Part of the process of providing information is how it's shared and whether it's protected, and federal and state statutes that touch upon that. If we can go to the next slide. I think one of the most important documents that's been issued in many, many years by the U.S. Department of Education is this one. It's their guidance on FERPA, the Federal Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And as you look through this slide and access it through the web, you'll find that there are many opportunities to share information without violating federal law. So down in the right corner there, it says personal knowledge or observation. And this is, let's just stop on that for a second. FERPA does not prohibit a school official from disclosing information about a student if the information is obtained through the school official's personal knowledge or observation and not from the student's education records. For example, if a teacher overhears a student making threatening remarks to other students, FERPA does not protect that information, and the teacher may disclose what he or she overheard to appropriate authorities. This is a really, really important guidance, and I think all the school administrators in the audience could probably think about any number of examples where they've overheard something in the hall. That's not protected student educational records. You can go to law enforcement if the threat is real and something needs to be done about it. Or you can go to your threat assessment team if you have one in place. So you can vet this issue up the line.
Shamus, I think this might be a good opportunity to ask you a question that someone had early on, and that is, has the reasonable suspicion standard that allows school authorities to conduct searches that police might not be able to under the stricter standard, has that reasonable suspicion standard been expanded at all to take into account threats that might involve violence? So if there are weapon threats. So.
Well, the reasonable suspicion standard is still in play in schools. There are some jurisdictional issues depending on, where your incident is occurring. But in terms of information sharing, the FERPA guidance, the HIPAA exceptions that are briefly referenced here talk about a good faith basis to share information. And in a threat assessment situation, we have to keep in mind that the threat assessment team within a school can use reasonable suspicion to articulate whether or not a threat exists. But at some point, if law enforcement needs to become involved, that issue is turned over to law enforcement, and they operate under a different set of circumstances.
Great. Thanks.
So here's some other opportunities as I look at it. I think in many respects, school lawyers and others fall into the trappings of saying that there's so much preclusion under federal statutes and state statutes, against sharing information, that they don't look at the exceptions or some things that might not qualify as protected information. In our state, for instance, law enforcement can disclose if it aids law enforcement purposes or promotes health or safety or dispels widespread rumors or unrest. The U.S. Patriot Act requires disclosure without student consent in a terrorist investigation, and that the definition of a terrorist investigation has changed over time. It's not just a 9/11 type incident anymore. It can be much more broad than that. HIPAA allows protected health information to be disclosed to avoid a serious threat of health or safety. And this is the good faith standard I was speaking to. If you believe as a school official that the disclosure is necessary to prevent or lessen a serious and imminent threat to health or safety, you can disclose, and you're not going to be, in my view, held liable for your good faith disclosure. So school emergencies, in a true emergency, school personnel may be able to disclose to the school resource officer, for instance, medically relevant information about the threat and imminent health or safety issue. So we're at the end of our presentation, and we have a couple of slides here with regard to resources. There's a lot of great things out there that schools, school leaders, school safety personnel, school council can access that will help vet these issues and practical resources to put emergency planning in place. Rick and I are both available to help with more specific questions if schools or other folks have questions. But I want to emphasize again that we believe that the issue of emergency management in schools should be a coordinated, integrated approach, should involve your partners, and if you do that, if you practice it, if you take ownership over it, you'll find that as an emergency occurs, you'll have a plan in place and an ability to respond with your partners in a cogent and meaningful way. Rick, any final thoughts?
No, I think I've just underscored. I think these, fortunately, we have to do these types of webinars, but they are also very good reminders to the various different school administrators that are participating, as I'm sure the attorneys that represent our school districts. There's so much more that Shamus and I could have covered throughout this webinar. Based on experience, what we try to do is to get the highlights. So certainly, as Shamus said, we're available for additional resource and counsel, but not to discount the work of the resources not only from NSBA but COSA and those others that are on the page. They have great resources and information that's been provided and really have taken into account many of the school incidents that we face and unfortunately have learned from.
Well, gentlemen, you've been so informative today. I do have a few questions that folks have posed as you've been talking. been trying to find a place to interrupt you and just haven't been able to. So I thought perhaps we could end with a few questions that people have on their mind. One is very timely, as the NRA issued a statement today, and of course President Obama has appointed a task force to discuss gun control. So I'm wondering to what extent arming school staff has ever come up as part of emergency planning, if you've ever seen it discussed before, as it is being discussed now. There was a finding, I believe, in one of the reports about how despite prompt law enforcement response, often the attack does not stop due to police, although my understanding from the Newtown reports is that, once police arrived, it did stop. So I'm wondering if you could comment, first of all, on the whole idea of arming school staff, and of course we're not putting policy positions out here, but just as a matter of whether you've ever seen that as part of emergency planning, and the whole relationship with law enforcement.
This is Shamus. I've been involved in a couple of discussions with regard to that issue, but not very many. I think there's a number of things that kind of revolve around that issue. It's guns in schools. There's a Gun-Free School Act, a federal law that prohibits firearms in many situations around schools. How would, I assume we're talking about teachers, how would teachers be trained? Would there be an accredited training for that, the use of that firearm? How often would they be trained? Will they holster their weapon? Will they put it in their desk? Would it be secure from students? What kind of access would they have? Will it promote safe climate? Is one of my concerns about highlighting a need for arming teachers, if that's the perspective of those asking the question, is will it promote a safe climate? What does it tell students? If they see a teacher walking around with a holster and a gun attached, is that facilitating a positive and appropriate school climate? Or the message that it's so unsafe at this school that we have to carry firearms? And I think going back to some of the comments we had early on the prevention and mitigation piece and the setting up of these safety teams and the safety planning, you have to assess your vulnerabilities. You have to take a look at the issues that are there and present at your schools. Is it at the top of your list that you put a gun in the hands of a teacher? And if it is, how are you going to do that? And what responsibilities will schools take on for that? There are all sorts of different scenarios that I'm sure Rick and I both can articulate on for the next hour about how things could go wrong with a gun in a teacher's hand, and misconceptions about particular students. But there is a place for this discussion, and I don't mean to diminish it at all, but there are very important considerations before we start buying weapons and putting them in teachers' hands.
We do have a couple of questions from attorneys in the audience mentioning the health and safety exception at the federal, the FERPA law contains. So we do have an exception in there, much like HIPAA, that allows disclosure of information that might be in a student record in the case of a health or safety emergency. But an important question that this attorney raises is, at what point is the emergency officially over? I mean, many states don't have an exception similar to Minnesota's that would allow perhaps for more time to disclose things when you weren't faced with the immediacy of an emergency, the district will want to communicate as much as possible, including perhaps FERPA protected materials with police, to continue to protect people after the emergency. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think I would need to know more information about the type of incident involved and where we are at in terms of the issue of disclosure. Are we doing it as part of a liability situation that follows an emergency, or are we doing it as a practical way to avoid or mitigate the consequences of what occurred? You know, the FERPA guidance that I spoke to came, I think, in the wake of Virginia Tech, and it was a discussion about medically relevant information that could be put in the right hands so that these issues could be appropriately vetted, mindful of privacy considerations, so that we could understand that situation and hopefully help abate incidents of violence. So if we're talking about an issue of violence and potential violence or ongoing violence, there could be an episode of violence within a school, but there could be a ongoing threat if a student, say, wasn't expelled. And in that regard, there may very well be an opportunity to continue to disclose information, medically relevant information, I think properly vetted through the school threat assessment team first, to come up with any recommendation about whether and to what extent to then disclose to law enforcement agency or mental health professionals to deal with that ongoing threat.
Thanks, Shamus. Another question we had was whether there's a standard policy available for schools to use developing or updating their current crisis policies. I would, of course, encourage you all to contact your state school boards association, which likely has a policy that encompasses both state and federal law, but perhaps Shamus or Rick could speak to federal guidelines you had mentioned.
Well, I think that's a great resource to start with is your state school board association. Individual school districts, certainly the local control will have some policies, obviously, that pertain to that specific school district. So I think the best to use a template or a model is to start with your school board association and then tailor that policy that fits best your community.
There's also a number of resources that we've cited from the U.S. Department of Education. The Tools for Schools comes to mind, the emergency preparedness kits. I'm holding in my hand a bomb threat response tool, interactive tool from the Department of Education. I talked about the threat assessment CD. I think if those attendees would take a look at some of the resources that we've cited at the U.S. Department of Education level, you'll find just a wealth of resources out there that would help you model your plan and set up a framework for you then to go out with your partners and start filling in the blanks.
And Sonia, let me add, I know this was not the direct question, but when it comes to emergency plans, your crisis response or emergency management plan, again, there are templates, there are resources that we've provided today, and I would strongly advise against any school district that would take another school district's plan and use it as the cookie-cutter approach for that district. Each plan needs to be unique to that school district, and working with their partners, as Shamus and I have reiterated a couple times, the plan needs to be unique not only to each individual school but also the school district. And it's important to point out, too, that when it comes to emergency plans, let's not spend all our time trying to identify each individual crisis that may occur either in the school and or district, but more on what our response is through incident command systems, into who is to do what, the specific roles and responsibilities, and then strong effort in the training aspects for all of our staff, and certainly the drills that we require here in Minnesota and other states for our students and staff. Training does not have to be the full-blown SWATs coming through schools, mock crisis drills that some districts have gone through. I encourage that law enforcement do those kinds of drills because that's what they need to be successful, but school district staff are far better served by doing tabletop scenarios to do these types of walkthroughs of the incidents that they likely would encounter and experience.
That's so important, Rick. Thanks for stressing the need for each individual district to really go through the process of looking at their own situation. We did have one question, Shamus, about the title of the threat assessment CD you had mentioned, the scenarios. Is that listed in the resources?
You know, I don't think it is. Let me just say it again. Okay. It's entitled A Safe School and Threat Assessment Experience, Scenarios Exploring the Findings of the Safe School Initiative. And it's a 2006 CD. I think I have a couple extra copies here, so if anyone wanted to email me, I could send you what I've got, and I can also put you in touch with the Department of Education individual who can probably get you more.
Great. Well, I wish we could get to everyone's comments and questions. I know a lot of you out there have dealt with crises, if not shootings, and that you're trying to act proactively and preventatively. We did have a very poignant question from someone who had been at Newtown, which is there anything that can be done to prevent this sort of thing from happening again? And we find ourselves asking that question every time, and with experts like Shamus and Rick, we're trying to really focus on safety daily, but I think we all have to face that we can't prevent these tragic occurrences overall 100%. So it's a sobering thought that it stresses the need to have the safety precautions. So any final thoughts, Shamus or Rick?
Yeah, on that one, Sonia, I will say that, you know, as I think I've noted before, school districts have come a long way in the last 13 and a half years since the Columbine tragedy. We've learned a tremendous amount. Law enforcement have changed protocols. They've learned a tremendous amount. It is sad that we have these large-scale incidents that we all have been witness to over the years that have created the kind of media attention that last Friday's sad event did. What we don't necessarily hear is all those events that have been averted or interventions have taken place. And so when Shamus has talked specifically about those prevention and mitigation efforts, those resources to help identify students through student assessment teams that are disenfranchised or falling through the cracks, what typically some would say you profile the bad kids. When those steps are in place, when school districts are doing that work, we will continue to be far more successful in averting these types of tragedies than the ones that have made national attention.
I think that's well said, Rick. I would just like to add that we're all in this together. There are all sorts of professionals and walks of life that are in schools every day. And there are people that are not in schools that put their kids in the school every day that care deeply about this issue. And those are our partners, and we are not doing this alone. And we have come a long way. We are dealing in the aftermath of tragedy last week, and it's important, I think, to keep in mind that safety is not just school shooting incidents. It's everyday occurrences, and everyone is involved.
Well, with that, our time has run out. Again, I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions. To all of you who registered for the webinar, the PowerPoint was sent to you via email today, about an hour before the webinar or 2 hours before. The recording for this will be posted on the NSBA site. Everyone here at National Sports Association, wish you all a peaceful holiday season. Thanks so much to Shamus and Rick. Bye, everyone.